Welcome back to Talk of the Town. We are so glad you have joined us this morning, and we hope everyone's feeling encouraged, or at least that they know how to better listen and engage in conversation with your spouse, your neighbor, even your political foes. It's important that we make sure that these are productive conversations. And one thing I do want to talk about a little bit, and we can start with you, Professor Beaupre, and I would certainly put myself in this camp, and we probably put unfair, messianic sort of expectations on President Obama 4 years ago, that we were headed towards a post-racial world, a post-partisan world, that, you know, the gridlock in Washington, D.C. was going to be over once and for all. It obviously wasn't happening. I think, you know, you could argue that things are as divided and divisive as ever. What happened, aside from unrealistic expectations? I don't know that I'm the person to analyze that. I think it's a multitude of things, and there's probably plenty of blame to go around. Washington is a partisan, combative place, and they stop. I was listening when we were talking just a little bit earlier, and what the panel was saying. We're not at a point where people were trying to get converts; they're trying to get casualties, and I think that, and that's just ramped up between the president and the Congress. There's a great article in Vanity Fair by this guy Lewis, who spent time with the president, and Obama's comment was the bully pulpit, the ability to sway opinion by having that microphone, is fractured, and that's because the first time he says something, there's a whole legion of people that just descend on him. Well, how can you have a public debate then? So I wouldn't know where to place the blame. It's all the things we've talked about here, and unfortunately, the people who lead our country have been immensely susceptible to all those forces.
Well, I think that's where everyone does need to, frankly, look at themselves in the mirror and say that if I am part of an audience and part of a market that's generating commercial and advertising dollars for someone who, no matter what the president says on either side, the left or the right, my goal is to attack this person or attack that person, and that's a problem. Bishop Dantley, what do you think? I mean, we're obviously... I think no one's under the delusion 4 years later that the hope that was felt on election night 4 years ago, I think by truly people across the board, that this could be, we could move in a different direction, even if I don't agree with him on the issues. That bubble has been burst, I guess. What happens next? Why didn't we get where we wanted to be?
Yeah, I believe you're right. I believe that there was a messianic kind of expectation on President Obama.
We're all human beings at the end of the day.
That nobody would be able to fulfill under any set of circumstances. I do believe that we are at least cognizant of the issue. I think that where we go from here is to expect really some pragmatic steps that our government can take under the leadership of President Obama to address some of the issues that have been mentioned here. On another side, I'd like to say this, as far as looking at ourselves, as you said, looking at the man in the mirror, I know that I am right 97% of the time, and the other 4% doesn't matter. Right? Okay, exactly. And so I do, as well as everyone else, has to begin to listen very carefully to the other side of issues and find myself being open to hear what other people have to say.
Dave, you didn't know I was going to be asking the panel to play a psychologist today, but one other thing I was sort of interested in, I think a lot of attention has been given recently to bullying in our society, and I'm wondering if there's any relationship between the tone that our leaders set and how that ends up trickling down. I think Tamai and I were talking, the governor of Arizona sort of wagging her finger in the face of the president of the United States, or Congressman Joe Wilson yelling out, "You lie," during the State of the Union, which regardless of how you feel, there's a way of expressing those feelings. Do you think that, again, I'm sort of asking you to be the dime store psychologist here, but that bullying among the adults trickles down to bullying among the kids?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, kids see that, they model behavior, and not just through their parents, but through our leaders, in Congress and elsewhere, the president. They do set a tone, and it does trickle down. So I think that's maybe the most important piece to remember, is that we're teaching young people how to talk to each other.
And maybe that's the sort of powerful call to action of, this isn't about attacking your foe of today. We all have children, and they are going to mimic your behavior. Although maybe I'm naive to think that would actually improve things too.
Can I just say something about that incident with the finger pointing at the president? For me, I thought that even the folks who were in the Secret Service were too civil where that was concerned.
Yeah.
I thought so, because I thought if I, Joe Blow citizen, were to put my finger in the president's face, I'd be on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be on the ground immediately. And so to accept that kind of what I believe to be disrespect to the president and not have anything happen, I thought in that case civility went a bit too far.
Right. David Mann, one of the other things we've been interested in is obviously we live in a world now, although I think the Obamas have sort of done a different job of this with their children, but spouses become involved in political campaigns, kids become involved in political campaigns. When we think about the sort of rules of civility, when the candidate involves their family, and in some ways, this might not be said in the most elegant way, but makes them props in the campaign, do they become fair game as well?
That's a good question. I think it depends on how the family, what family the role adopts. When the children are trotted out and to show, a family man, family love, and those things, I would say not, particularly if they're minors. If a wife of a candidate starts giving policy pronouncements, if the spouse makes a mistake, I think that's fair game.
Can I ask everyone to think about, and David, we'll start with you, when you think about, and I guess they don't have to be a political figure, but in this case, I'll say don't say your grandma. That can be a good answer, but, I guess a public figure who you really think set a tone that was a good model for the country, a good model for their community, that all of us can admire, again, even when there's disagreement on the issues. And David, you've spent a lot of time around a lot of public officials. Who would you start with in terms of someone you admire, the civility they projected?
Well, one of my all-time favorites locally, of course, is Bobby Stern.
Mm-hmm.
And she...
former mayor and council member, right?
Yes. She served on council close to 25 years, which is an argument against term limits, by the way, in my view.
Save it for another show.
Yeah. But she had strong feelings, was quite willing to argue with you, but always in a way that respected the other side.
Right. Dave Holthouse, someone who you think is admirable for the tone they set.
Yeah, well, I lived in Indiana for a few years, and Senator Dick Lugar, I thought, was just an excellent legislator and very, very balanced, very, very smart, had the country's best interests in mind. Unfortunately, he lost in the primary because of a lot of the things that we're talking about today.
It's so funny you bring up that example, and I am proudly a Democrat, but I do look with a sense of sadness and lamentation that a moderate, respected, serious senator like Dick Lugar, his own party said, we can't have you, frankly, because you're not extreme enough. He lost in a primary to a Tea Party candidate. And
right.
I do, you've seen that with Evan Bayh, also in Indiana, a sort of moderate guy who was willing to reach across the aisle, said, frankly, I don't like the way Washington's functioning. Olympia Snowe from Maine, and that same, people who were willing to reach across the aisle and made that a practice, said either we don't want to or their party cast them out. I think it's an interesting pick, yeah.
Right.
Bishop Dantley,
I think John Lewis from Georgia sets a remarkable tone, given everything that he has been through.
Sure.
And yet he is able to have this conciliatory kind of tone to what he says.
That's such a good point, too, that I think also is the most powerful reminders is when you see people who have every right to be angry, to not be civil, and they still are. That's a great reminder, too. And Gene Beaupre.
So folks will have this is a reach for people generally, but I think Dave will understand it. I grew up, I learned politics working for Jerry Springer. And Dave's giving me a thumbs up on this. If you take the show away, show away, when Jerry started out, he could be as passionate and as eloquent and as effective, but he always tried to understand where the other person was, and he had really fundamental values that I think drove him. He had clear, bright lines that he would not cross. And yet I think he was one of the most effective politicians, for that era that I've seen. And I still have a lot of respect for him for that.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of folks at home who have not met Jerry in person might think that's an unconventional choice. But I think the people who've heard him speak sincerely about the things he cares about, yeah, there's no question. Tamaya, what do you think? A civility hero.
Before I answer this, I want to just put Bishop Dantley on the spot because he gave the most beautiful invocation earlier this week for President Obama's visit, and it was awesome. And my head was bowed, and we were praying, but I couldn't help but look up because the words were so powerful. So Lord, forgive me for staring at Bishop Dantley during the invocation because it was so awesome. But honestly, he's not a politician, but I would have to say Carl Linder because he was clearly a Republican, but he was so passionate about people. And he was, even though he was conservative in his views, he cared about people. And I think that's missing. People always say, the Republicans now are not your father's Republicans. So I'm a proud Democrat as well, but he was somebody who cared about people, and he had that sense of community that transcended party lines or political beliefs.
Right. Speaking of Bishop Dantley's eloquence, I did want to maybe give you the last word here and actually think about sort of civility in the pulpit. Obviously, pastors play such an important role in our community. They also play an important role in our politics. Has the tone from the pulpit, what direction has it gone over recent decades?
Well, there's no doubt about it that the tone in the pulpit has gotten much more political. And I think it's going to continue in that vein. I'm not certain that the discourse is not as volatile as it used to be. I think it is. I think the civil rights issues were part of the pulpit. I think that where we're living now that's definitely part of the pulpit. So I don't think our discourse is going to get less, not divisive, but less powerful on issues.
Right. Well, I guess the part of the thing today was, who knows exactly where the conversation is going to go, but we certainly appreciate all of you being part of this conversation. So, Gene Beaupre from Xavier University, Bishop Michael Dantley, Dave Holthouse, opinion editor of the Cincinnati Enquirer, and David Mann, local attorney and former council member, mayor, and member of the United States Congress. Thank you all so much for being with us, and thanks to everyone at home for listening in. We hope you will go out and speak kindly and thoughtfully to your neighbors. That is our show for today. Until next time, I'm PG Sittenfeld, and you are the talk of the town.
Let's get into it. Get stupid. Get it started. Get it started. Get it started. Let's go.